Woodstock, a festival that changed the course of history forever. It brought together a new generation of music that crystallized the sound and slogans of an era. The stars were realigning. A new generation was emerging. Unfolding were earth-shaking events that couldn't be stopped by the smug conformity and perfect white picket fences of past generations. The Apollonian age of Pisces, characterized by militarism, intellectual formalism, and collective certainty, was to be supplanted by a new era of openness, self-discovery, and individual freedom. It was the coming of the age of Aquarius. No conspiracies were afoot. At least, so goes the official story.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. This is seems to me the ultimate in malevolent revolution, shall we say.
I was a mere 16 that summer day. We all piled up in a beat-up car and drove to Woodstock, or someplace we had been told that a great spectacle was to occur, an earth-shaking event where all the stars that lit a generation's sky would be together, like an astronomical alignment. All their energies would merge and give voice to the coming brighter dawn we all felt was awakening in those times.
What if Woodstock wasn't so much an event or a journey as an experiment? At the heart of this new movement was what's known as the counterculture. Crowds raved for peace and love and turned on, tuned in, and dropped out. But within the bowels of the military-industrial complex, a bold reimagining of the image of man in mass control was already well underway. The latest insights into systems theory, cybernetics, behavioral science, linguistics, neuroscience, psychiatry, anthropology, psychoanalysis were all being brought together. Instead of the more formalized spiritual traditions across the West, a new ecosystem of spiritual institutions was emerging. Theosophists and New Age gurus and psychedelic shamans were advocating for the unleashing of mankind's hidden human potential through the transformative power of experiential knowledge. In his final novel, The Island, Aldous Huxley presents a subtly different and more nuanced version of the original Soma culture depicted in his Brave New World. At the heart of this new system of control would be the goal of meeting mankind's deepest spiritual desires in the form of a new spiritual drug called moksha. The denizens of Huxley's utopian island of Pala have willingly rejected a world based on scientific, industrial, and material progress. And instead, the citizens of Pala have opted for spiritual progress and the mystical ascent to higher levels of consciousness. Of course, their self-actualization is underpinned by tantric meditation, psychedelic drugs, and free love open communities. The word mother as a noun has been eliminated. Mother is now only a verb practiced among open families. Children can freely leave their birth family and choose to join a new family system if they think they were mismatched. Like Brave New World and many influential novels, Huxley's final novel reflected ongoing conversations within the world of opinion-making, social engineering, and human control. One of the most influential thinkers and researchers collaborating with Huxley was none other than psychosurgery evangelist Dr. William Sargent. Originally a psychiatrist at the Tavistock-related British military Maudsley Hospital, Sargent explored how various altered states of emotion could be induced in both ancient and modern man, using drugs, alcohol, torture, or even simply language and carefully framed imagery. Sargent traveled the world profiling various tribes and cultures to understand the seemingly magical transformations individuals experienced at the hands of shamans, priests, and faith healers. From Haitian voodoo rituals in which individuals found themselves possessed by spirits, to fundamentalist Christian preachers invoking visceral images of hellfire to instill in their flocks a healthy fear of God. Sargent observed that heightened emotional states could be used to artificially induce radical changes in belief and behavior, especially when augmented by magical rituals and spiritual spectacles. In one of his books, Sargent remarked, "From the Stone Age to Hitler, the Beatles, and modern pop culture, the brain of man has been constantly swayed by the same physiological techniques. Reason is dethroned. The normal brain computer is temporarily put out of action, and new ideas and beliefs are uncritically accepted. The mechanism is so powerful that while conducting this research into possession, trance, and faith healing in various parts of the world, I myself was sometimes affected by the techniques I was observing, even though I was on my guard against them." Sargent observed parallels between ancient rituals and, say, the mass hysteria and euphoria of a Beatles concert, and other forms of mass culture. Many of the other dancers approached very near trance and showed states of increased suggestibility at the end of a long and intensive period of repetitive and monotonous dancing. They looked very much like fans of the Beatles or other pop groups after a long session of dancing. Not surprisingly, Sargent was a correspondent and collaborator with none other than Donald Ewan Cameron, who led some of the CIA's notorious MKUltra mind control experiments at McGill University's Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada. Cameron sought Sargent's advice regularly. In one instance, Sargent sent Cameron a note, reminding him that, "Whatever you manage in this field, I thought of it first."
If some kind of satisfaction, either direct or indirect, were found for the instinctive drives and the frustrations and miseries of normal life, and the two great methods which they used, but to both of which they applied the term catharsis, the first of them historically was the method of the Dionysian orgy and dance. Dionysus in this context was called Lucios, the liberator, and he did liberate these people who lived an extraordinarily miserable life if they were slaves from a great deal of their sense of frustration and unhappiness by, first of all, giving them alcohol, and in the second place, encouraging these congregational dances. At a later period, the Dionysian rites seem to lose their interest, but their place was taken by the Corybantic dances in honor of the Great Mother. And here there was a specifically therapeutic value set upon these dances. For example, the people suffering from what we would now call anxiety syndromes or various types of neurosis were actually diagnosed by the way they responded to certain types of music, and in this way one could judge what daimon or god was possessing them, and suitable dances and religious rites were then prescribed for them, and they worked off in this way.
And so we came to the appointed place and joined the thousands walking on the roads like pilgrims to some mystic holy shrine. And I became as if one of that throng and lost myself in that great surging crowd. And I saw many things bizarre and new, the wild profusion of free growing hair and every possible exotic state of hue and clothing or of nakedness, and people dancing mid the summer corn to waves of mystical hypnotic tones and odors of hashish and cannabis, which sweetly drifted over all that place, like incense from some ancient Doric rite.
Ultimately, Huxley and Sargent's research was based on a perverse understanding of humanity's innate hunger for transcendence, a desire to leap beyond the bounds of a finite world, to overcome its limitations, fear, suffering, and tragedy. The sleight of hand would come by way of substituting the desire for transcendence with new clever forms of escape.
Again, sat mute as merchants of that trade enslaved the beautiful Promethean fire of reason to their grim and violent ends. Yes, even as we blithely breathe the air of summer's freedom in those sunny fields, across the world, in steamy jungle hells, our brothers bled and died and went insane. And only last summer, our cities burned when the last one of those great prophets fell, and hatred, like a cataclysmic storm, loomed over the horizon of our lives.
Mankind has an innate desire to transcend. The poet Percy Bysshe Shelley described this longing as the desire of the moth for the star. Man was by his nature created to reach for a deeper truth, beyond his immediate grasp. This desire lies at the heart of everything mankind discovers when he lifts the hidden veil of beauty. As the poet Edgar Allan Poe once described, inspired by an ecstatic prescience of the glories beyond the grave, we struggle by multiform combinations among the things and thoughts of time to attain a portion of that loveliness whose very elements, perhaps, appertain to eternity alone. The struggle to apprehend the supernal loveliness, this struggle, on the part of souls fittingly constituted, has given to the world all that which it has ever been enabled at once to understand and to feel as poetic. This spark of immortality, which lies at the heart of man and reflects his own divine nature as being made in the image of his Creator, lies at the heart of all our desires, argued C.S. Lewis. However, he cautioned his audiences. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trusted them. It was not in them, it only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols. Because we are confronted by this ever-present desire in all facets of our lives, it becomes all too easy to mistake the shadows as images of the real thing. We might call evil that which seeks to snuff out or pervert the spark, whether through fear, terror, physical violence, or more sophisticated psychological and spiritual control.
For we were a new generation, born not for the narrow realm of ordered thought, the world of soulless men and cold machines, and empty phrases that no one believed, but piously repeated just the same, of gods who punished or rewarded men as they obeyed like herded sheep or not. No, we were born to be the golden ones, free from all law save what was in our hearts.
Although present within us from the earliest days of our conscious awakening, that doesn't preclude this ever-present desire from taking on darker forms, being misled or fed with strange and subversive substitutes. Perhaps one of the most insightful studies into the genesis of the hippie culture is the story of Charles Manson. While eclipsed by its later dark unraveling, the early days of the family and Charles Manson remain emblematic of the dark strains that can possess us, but even more importantly, of the experiments at the heart of the 1960s. But where did Manson get his ideas from anyways? Well, what if we told you he also got his ideas from a fiction book? In fact, it was one of the most popular science fiction novels ever written, Stranger in a Strange Land. As the New Republic's Jeet Heer notes in his article, Charles Manson's Science Fiction Roots, Manson won them with the doctrine of communal bonding. They would be a family and share in all things, including love. Manson's made-up religion was a cut-and-paste invention that borrowed from many sources. As the New York Times notes, Manson's philosophy was a, quote, idiosyncratic mix of Scientology, hippie anti-authoritarianism, Beatles lyrics, the Book of Revelation, and the writings of Hitler, end quote. But the sci-fi component was pronounced. Stranger in a Strange Land provided the Manson family with its rituals, water-sharing ceremonies, terminology, grokking, and promise of transcendence. Manson's followers hoped that, like the hero of Heinlein's novel, they would gain mystical powers. The dream of mind triumphing over matter was also the sales pitch of Dianetics. Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land recounts the story of a Martian messiah who preaches a gospel of free love and creates a new religion based on sacred rituals like water sharing and mystical practices like grokking. As the historian David McGowan notes in his Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream, Heinlein's best-known work is the novel Stranger in a Strange Land, which many in the Laurel Canyon scene found to be hugely influential. Ed Sanders has written, in The Family, that the book helped provide a theoretical basis for Manson's family. Charlie frequently used Strangeland terminology when addressing his flock, and he named his first family-born son Valentine Michael Manson in honor of the book's lead character. But the hippie counterculture were all about peace and love. Charles Manson and the family committed cold-blooded murders. What does one have to do with the other? Well, more than you think. Going back to the 1960s and MKUltra mind control programs, research into psychedelics and the creation of new cults and spiritual movements had been at the center of developing new ways of repatterning memories, self-image, and creating new group identities. While such techniques could have beneficial effects when used to revisit past traumas or a distorted self-image, their transformative effects make clear why MKUltra researchers took such interest in the use of psychedelics and the possibility of creating new multiple realities. As journalist Tom O'Neill recounts in his groundbreaking Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s, psychedelics played an important role in the cultivation of the person of Charles Manson and the family. O'Neill found articles authored by some of the individuals responsible for treating Manson and his disciples. Research papers found in the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs, a journal belonging to the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, where Manson was treated, describe the study of psychedelics and their effects on group dynamics. Neil recounts reading several articles authored by David Smith and his fellow researchers at the HAFMC. Notably, David Smith happened to be one of the clinicians regularly attending Manson and the family. O'Neill notes, one of these articles hoped to find out whether a dramatic drug-induced experience would have a lasting impact on the individual's personality. Another observed that feelings of frustrated anger led people to want to try LSD. Quote, "The soil from which the flower children arise," the author wrote, "is filled more with anger and aggression, thorns and thistles, rather than passion and petunias. Under emotional pressure, acid could induce images and sensations of anger or hate magnified into nightmarish proportions." O'Neill goes on to say that David Smith had studied these same phenomena, formulating an idea that he called the, quote, psychedelic syndrome, first articulated in 1967 or early 68. The gist was that acid, when taken by groups of like-minded people, led to a chronic LSD state that reinforced the interpretation of psychedelic reality. The more often the same group of friends dropped acid, the more they encouraged one another to adopt the worldview they discovered together on LSD, thus producing dramatic psychological changes. Usually the psychedelic syndrome was harmless, but regular LSD use could cause the emergence of a dramatic orientation to mysticism. From the early peace and love hippie days to its final kill-on-command unraveling, O'Neill detailed the many different stages of repatterning the family and its members underwent, especially thanks to psychedelic use. Naturally, these MKUltra-related researchers were not the only ones taking interest in the psychedelic scene. Huxley, Leary et al. Viewed psychedelics as one of the keys to repatterning Western civilization as a whole. In his autobiographical flashbacks, psychedelics guru and CIA collaborator, Harvard professor Dr. Timothy Leary, described his and Huxley's reflections on the obstacles standing in the way of a new age of enlightenment. Huxley explained to Leary that central to any fundamental transformation were new brain drugs. These brain drugs, mass-produced in the laboratories, will bring about vast changes in society. This will happen with or without you or me. All we can do is spread the word. The obstacle to this evolution, Timothy, is the Bible. Leary then reflected on the obstacles they encountered as they sought to flesh out their vision of a new enlightened religion. We had run up against the Judeo-Christian commitment to one God, one religion, one reality that has cursed Europe for centuries and America since our founding days. Drugs that open the mind to multiple realities inevitably lead to a polytheistic view of the universe. We sensed that the time for a new humanist religion based on intelligence, good-natured pluralism, and scientific paganism had arrived. Discussions of mind-altering drugs and their potential for mystical transformations and mind-opening experiences were made possible by Albert Hofmann. He was a Swiss chemist who synthesized lysergic acid diethylamide from the wheat fungus ergot and discovered its hallucinogenic properties in 1943. Hofmann would go on to pen The Road to Aloysius, unveiling the secret of the mysteries in 1978. He believed that ergot was the likely secret ingredient in the ancient pagan rites of the Eleusinian mysteries. New Age guru and member of the Theosophist Buddhist Lodge, Alan Watts, would be another key psychedelic proselytizer who originally introduced the Beat Generation and the Western world to the way of Zen, drawing on Eastern Tantric and Buddhist practices that emphasized transcending the duality of the Christian and classical Greek world. He would further advertise the potential for a New Age and its psychedelic dimensions with works like The New Alchemy and The Joyous Cosmology. As occult researcher and New Age writer Jeffrey Kripal notes in Esalen, The Religion of No Religions, the official history of the Esalen Institute. As for Alan Watts's Joyous Cosmology, the subtitle alone suggests that the enlightenment of the body was quickly entering the chemical and even molecular and genetic levels through a kind of micro-mysticism. With Leary, moreover, who co-wrote the foreword to The Joyous Cosmology with his Harvard colleague Richard Alpert, it would not be long before an entire mysticism of DNA strands was set loose in the culture. A very small number of writers, artists, and intellectuals were transforming an entire generation. And they were doing it with what were essentially chemical spiritual tracks, infused more often than not with a kind of subtle reductionism of the sacred to the chemical. So we find the 1960s generation embracing a new ethos of turning on, tuning in, and dropping out, and opening the doors of perception. But what about the music? What do we really know about its origins? Surely, music remains one of the most intimate and authentic expressions of a people. Even if many of the ideas of the counterculture weren't directly conceived by the seas of rebellious youth sticking it to the man, surely they gave these ideas their quintessential sound and embodied what were otherwise just philosophical abstractions and flaky intellectualism. After all, even in Plato's time, the philosophers played a relatively minor role in shaping public opinion compared to the poets. The strains of the lyre and scenes of the hero could compel and capture an audience's imagination like nothing else. So maybe we should look to the great icons and songwriters of the 1960s, who were at the heart of shaping the sound of a generation. Well, this is where our story gets even weirder.
I had no idea that Laurel Canyon was actually the true birthplace, really, of the whole 60s counterculture, the music scene, and, the whole hippie flower child thing. So obviously most people, well, there's two major misconceptions that people have about, hippie flower child, the whole countercultural movement in the 60s, which was the biggest countercultural movement in U.S. history. And the two misconceptions are, number one, that the hippies and the anti-war movement were one and the same, that they were synonymous, and that's clearly not true. The anti-war movement was already well underway before the hippies appeared on the scene, and many of the original anti-war activists did not look on the hippies too kindly at all. In fact, I have quotes from people saying, "Where did these people come from? What is this, an intelligence operation?"
There were many revelations to me in this book, so let's start with the primary revelation, which was Lookout Mountain Laboratories. Tell us about that.
Lookout Mountain Laboratories was a top secret U.S. Air Force installation nestled up in Laurel Canyon, the existence of which remained unknown until fairly recently, even within the conspiracy community. Very few people seem to be aware of the existence of this facility, which remained operational at least through 1969 officially, and according to other sources, considerably beyond that, but certainly through 1969 during the peak years of the Laurel Canyon music scene, which was, a very curious discovery, to say the least, to find that nestled right in the middle of this bucolic hippie commune, so to speak, was a highly classified military establishment that was in full operation. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because, like I say, this was a fully operational film studio that capable of doing everything in-house. They had, every animation department, editing facilities, film vaults, sound stages, everything to make a film from soup to nuts. And,
Well, one of the strange things in the book that you mention is that people like John Wayne, Marilyn Monroe, these guys had ID passes. What were they doing there? Were they narrating things? Why would they need to be a part of this?
Yeah, some real heavyweights from Hollywood. Performers like Marilyn Monroe, John Wayne, as you mentioned. I think Jimmy Stewart, and very heavyweight filmmakers like I think John Ford and a couple others. Were involved. They had security clearance to work in this facility, and yet no one seems to know exactly what they did there.
While no one in 2025 would have trouble admitting that many of today's most celebrated pop acts are manufactured in the equivalent of music industry test tubes by savvy producers and money-hungry record labels, what about the seminal musical acts of the hippie generation? How much do we really know about their origins? Fortunately, groundbreaking research by historian David McGowan allows us to delve into the hidden history of the music that shaped a generation. This research leads us into a nondescript, bucolic neighborhood, once quietly tucked away in the Hollywood Hills. Laurel Canyon. One of the most iconic musical acts of the countercultural generation was none other than The Doors, a band whose name was inspired by Aldous Huxley's famous psychedelic Bible, The Doors of Perception. So what do we know about these iconic groups?
You've got this strange covert military installation looming over Los Angeles, In Santa Monica, we have the Rand Corporation, another spooky entity. This all looms over LA and the burgeoning entertainment scene, which takes us to the real point of the story, which is the rock and roll that came out of Laurel Canyon. And certainly the most famous or enigmatic figure to emerge from that scene would have to be Jim Morrison, the Lizard King, the lead singer of The Doors. But he also had a very conspicuous father. Tell us a little bit about Jim and his father and their place in that strange saga.
Yeah, Jim was certainly a larger-than-life figure, to this day, very, very iconic figure. Yeah, the curious thing about him is that his father was actually a very high-ranking Navy admiral, which that part was known prior to my work on this book. But what I discovered, which had not been previously reported, is that not just was he a Navy admiral, but he just happened to be the Navy admiral who oversaw the Gulf of Tonkin incident. He was the commanding officer of the ships involved in that notorious incident, which of course led immediately to the passage of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, and then to the full-scale involvement of ground troops in Vietnam, and ultimately the deaths of some 60,000 Americans and countless millions of Vietnamese and Laotian and Cambodian people, all of which was a direct result of this so-called Tonkin Gulf incident, which, Jim Morrison's father was a key figure, to say the least, in orchestrating that whole incident that quickly resulted in the U.S. being, engulfed in a very, very bloody quagmire over there. And that happened just like within a year or so of the sun emerging on the Laurel Canyon Sunset Strip scene as this larger-than-life icon of the anti-war, peace movement crowds. By his own account, he had no musical training and had never viewed himself as a musician or singer-songwriter. And as you say, not long before he emerged as this figure that we see here, was a very much different Jim Morrison, very clean-cut, collegiate, almost unrecognizable. Seeing his father off as he was about to leave, I think sailed out of San Diego for the Gulf of Tonkin, and within a year he had completely transformed himself physically and emerged as this rock star, just out of nowhere. I mean, just an amazing physical transformation and an amazing transformation from someone who had expressed no interest in music whatsoever to, just like overnight becoming this huge international star.
As McGowan notes, all four members of the group lacked previous band experience. Morrison and Manzarek, as noted, were film students. And drummer John Densmore and guitarist Robbie Krieger were recruited by Manzarek from his transcendental meditation class, which is, I guess, where one goes to find musicians to fill out one's band. That class, however, apparently lacked a bass player, so they did without, except for those times when they used session musicians, and then claimed that they did without. McGowan notes how, despite having no musical training, Jim would have supposedly written all the lyrics for The Doors' most memorable songs before he joined the band. So here we had a guy who had never sang, who had never even conceived of the notion that he could open his mouth and make sounds come out, who couldn't play an instrument and had no interest in learning such a skill, and who had never much listened to music or been anywhere near a band, even just to watch one perform. And yet, he somehow emerged, virtually overnight, as a fully formed rock star who would quickly become an icon of his generation. Even more bizarrely, legend holds that he brought with him enough original songs to fill the first few Doors albums. Morrison did not, you see, do as other singer-songwriters do and pen the songs over the course of the band's career. Instead, he allegedly wrote them all at once, before the band was ever formed. As Jim once acknowledged in an interview, he was not a very prolific songwriter. Most of the songs I've written, I wrote in the very beginning, about 3 years ago. Even those who worked closest with the band were at times candid about its musicianship. As their own producer, often referred to as the Fifth Door, Paul Rothchild said, "The Doors weren't great live performers musically. They were exciting theatrically and kinetically, but as musicians, they didn't make it. There was too much inconsistency. There was too much bad music. Robbie would be horrendously out of tune with Ray. John would be missing cues. There was bad mic usage too, where you couldn't hear Jim at all." But who was Paul Rothchild? Well, as McGowan informs us, yet another curious character to take up residence in Laurel Canyon was producer Paul Rothchild, who played a key role in shaping the sound of both The Doors and Love. In June 1981, Sports Illustrated publisher Philip Howlett penned a short piece to introduce readers to new writer Bjarne Rostang. Born in Lincoln, New York, Rostang grew up in various places in Connecticut, where he attended what he recalls as even a dozen schools. "I got my BA and Master's in English from the University of Connecticut," he says. "Then I did part of a PhD at the University of Washington before going into the Army Intelligence Corps in 1959. We had Paul Rothchild, who later became producer for The Doors, and Janis Joplin. Just to give you some idea of what the unit was like." McGowan muses on one of those open secrets in the entertainment world. It was in all likelihood like countless other intelligence units designed to churn out shapers of public opinion, whether actors, novelists, newsmen, or in this case, sports writers and producers of popular music. It is quite shocking, of course, to learn that the handler of two of Laurel Canyon's most influential and groundbreaking bands had a background in intelligence work. Apparently, the search is still on for anyone of any prominence in the Laurel Canyon scene who didn't have direct connections to the intelligence community. In one of the recently published journals from the collected works of Jim Morrison, overseen by his sister Anne Morrison Schuning, Jim apparently wrote, quote, "End with fond goodbye and plans for future. Not an actor, writer, filmmaker," he wrote. "Which of my selves will be remembered? Goodbye, America. I love you." It appears that Jim, who never expressed a passion or interest in music before his sudden, overnight transformation, had planned to return to his true passion, film, which is what he studied at UCLA. Who or what drew Jim into a completely different direction? We'll perhaps never know.
More than just musical superstars, because they actually carried the music scene to a whole nother level, and
it became like a club.
It became huge. Record sales just skyrocketed between like 1960 and 1970. Music sales just skyrocketed. Musical stars just became huge, and they became much more than just rock stars. They became sort of these spokesmen and leaders for an entire generation of disaffected youth.
That some of the quintessential rock acts of the 1960s may have been manufactured and had questionable ties to military intelligence families and operators is one thing. But not all of them, right?
Almost all of these bands had within their family background military intelligence, some form of military ties, political ties. I'm going to name some of the bands out in Laurel Canyon because there's so many. The Byrds, The Doors, Buffalo Springfield, The Monkees, The Beach Boys, Steppenwolf, Love, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, The Turtles, The Mamas and the Papas, The Flying Burritos Brothers, The Eagles, America. There was the singer-songwriters Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, Linda Ronstadt, Carole King. It's nuts.
Right down the line, you look at all the major characters from the LA music scene, the genesis of the hippie scene, and every damn one of them is from a military/intelligence background. Every one of them. I mean, Frank Zappa's dad was a chemist at the Edgewood Arsenal, for crying out loud. I mean, he was a chemical warfare technician at one of the most notorious facilities in the country. I mean, there's just all kinds of evil that has emanated from that place. I mean, anybody that's done any kind of conspiracy research knows, all about the Edgewood Arsenal, and that's where Frank Zappa's dad worked, and that's where Frank Zappa grew up and went to school. They actually lived in military housing on the base, and Frank attended the Edgewood School there. He was born, raised and educated at the Edgewood Arsenal, of all places, and he again became this, huge icon of the flower power generation. He was actually very right-wing, very authoritarian personality, described repeatedly as a control freak, as this very authoritarian type of guy. He was actually pro-war. He vigorously pro-capitalist. He actually boycotted some countries where he was asked to, invited to come on tour because he didn't agree with their politics. I mean, he was, by no stretch of the imagination was he a liberal or left-winger or, whatever you would associate with the, 60s counterculture. And yet, there he was as a shining icon. In fact, he occupied a home that was like a major meeting place, the old Tom Mix cabin, where anyone who was anyone in the mid to late 60s spent time at that cabin. I mean, he was sort of the godfather of Laurel Canyon for a while, and his background.
For love had long since vanished from their hearts. That puling, weak, and poisonous idea which plagued the world for 2 millennia, that all are destined to an equal worth, and with some innate sacredness are born. For it was never so in nature's realm, where strength and beauty are their own reward. And mankind, lacking this necessity, will never rise to all that he can be, terrible and beautiful in his might, conquering all the universe he sees.
Felt that they were set up to actually quash the anti-war movement, especially with all the drugs and Timothy Leary, tune in, drop out, and all of this. It was more like they were leading people down a path away from the anti-war movement to just get stoned and not give a damn.
Exactly. I mean, Leary said that explicitly. I mean, at one point he told a crowd that he told people, you want to know what to do about the Vietnam War? Just turn your back on it. Just forget about it. I mean, that was his advice. And if you look through the songbooks of these bands, you're not going to find a whole lot of overtly anti-war songs. What you find is promotion of the Leary agenda, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the turn on, tune in, drop out.
The revelation that culture is much more than a form of entertainment can be difficult to appreciate. Culture's effects on our society are as great as they are impossible to measure. Culture can be a tool or a weapon that shapes the political and social landscape we inhabit in ways that few, if any of us, fully understand. The idea that the sounds and images we grew up with were never really ours or our generations, or what we thought they were at all, but rather the creation of opinion makers, can be painful, and parting with our illusions is never easy. Then again, Even in his times, over 2,000 years ago, Plato paid special attention to the poetry and music that brought to life the shadows on the cave walls of ancient Greek society. Plato recognized that the poems and songs of ancient Greece were essentially charms, shaping the inner life and emotional matrix of Greek civilization, largely through mesmerizing strains and captivating images. Then as today, most of us get our cues on how to think about something based on how we feel about it. And much of that is rooted in the culture, the music, the art, and images it proliferates. From ancient Greece until our modern times, arguably, not much has changed. Today we have music, memes, films, and social media. All play their part in the vast image-making machine that shapes our modern media and entertainment landscape. And just as Plato observed in his day, the images proliferated by the poets and artists throughout the culture could be revelatory, or they could be deceptive or misleading. They could heighten our awareness and awaken our higher faculties, or they could serve as pleasant forms of entertainment or distraction. In conclusion, evil, by its very nature, stakes its entire existence on the idea that people will always love their illusions more than truth or self-knowledge. It must necessarily invest great resources and energy to maintain a culture that lives and thrives off illusions. Admittedly, the difference between illusions and the real thing isn't obvious for any of us. While truth and self-knowledge can lead us to a discovery of true freedom, illusions are the prison we create of our own free choice. Evil is banking on the latter.